I understand that the gunman shouted "Free, free Palestine," I think immediately after he shot them. So it was a killing carried out in his own mind in support of Palestine. But he has not done Palestine any good. I mean, that's the fact. This is going to strengthen the hand of the Zionists, especially within the United States, and it's going to, mean that like the effort to round up um, Palestine supporters among graduate students, for example, that effort will intensify. It's, it's a terrible thing that happened. But what we can see, I mean, I'm not in any way justifying it, but things like this will happen, because there is a genocide going on and people are being pushed to the breaking point and beyond. So we had, for example, what was it, Aaron Bushnell, better than a year ago, set himself afire, self-immolated and died, for Palestine. He couldn't take it. And I think just a couple months earlier, there was a young woman who did something similar. I think she survived, but she was critically injured. So we are seeing these kind of things happen. And, I wouldn't advise anybody to do any of these things, but, most definitely, you can say that, like in the case of Aaron Bushnell, um, it, you could argue, again, I wouldn't advise anybody to do this. I think it's wrong, but you could argue that it actually does strengthen, it does help the Palestinian cause. But certainly these killings do not. They're unjustified, and they actually strengthen the Zionists.
I don't even know if I should go here, but the internet is, a lot of people seem to be very suspicious about these killings. People say things like false flags. Nobody's seen any, as far as I know, any videos or photos of actually any bodies or the killings. There's just the footage afterwards of saying "Free, free Palestine," and then the idea is that the starvation campaign in Gaza was getting so extreme to pivot the story over to the narrative over to anti-Semitism and how these people are being gunned down simply for being Jewish. That's what's being put out there. I was watching the news yesterday. BBC News had a long coverage, and they're talking about there's just a rise in anti-Semitism. They had the Anti-Defamation League on there. All these things, lots of pieces going on about this. They're really. And you just see on Twitter every single congressman and politician condemning it. And obviously, if a murder is a murder. It's a horrific act. But some people find that suspicious. How the timing of it. Do you think that should we even entertain that possibility, or it's not even something that you want to touch?
Yeah, well, it clearly benefits Israel. It clearly benefits the Zionists. I find that highly doubtful. I guess I've learned not to be just entirely dismissive if there's some really solid evidence that comes forward. But it seems like, how can you hide this? If these people, indeed existed and they were killed, I don't think that's a fact that you can hide. I don't see how it could be hidden. So I find it very hard to believe that it was a false flag.
I just find it kind of weird that when assassinations or murders happen, I'm just thinking of like the Luigi guy with the CEO of the large health insurance companies. I forget what it's called, but we have footage of that. People see it, or there's the bodies. These things aren't usually that hidden, and I feel like if you're in the middle of DC, in the front of a museum, I'm just surprised that we haven't seen anything, before or after. Simply just that.
Yeah, well, I'm assuming that we will, that, and if some information, if no evidence is ever presented, then I think you'd have you would be well justified in questioning it. That should be part of any sort of investigation, inquest. It's like the bodies have to be examined and whatever, and if we get some sort of credible information that didn't happen, then okay, yeah, maybe. Again, it clearly is to the benefit of Israel and its supporters. But I think it's much too early to jump to those kind of conclusions.
Right. Yeah. I know we should just. That's why I was hesitant to even bring it up. I'm like, I know we should wait, but it's easy to get sucked down in these things and start thinking like, well, and I know
on the
I
other
shouldn't,
hand,
so.
it's I find it believable that somebody cracked and he just got so angry that he just said, I'm going to, shoot these. Yeah, I don't know if he knew them, if he knew that they were connected with the embassy or not, or if they were just Jewish. But one way or another, in his mind, he felt like, these people are doing such terrible things, and I just have to, I have to do something, and it can't go on. Again, it's wrong, it's unjustified. In the end, it's terribly counterproductive. But I think, again, we've been talking about this genocide and how horrible it is and how it's just like, this can't go on. There are a lot of people that are really are having trouble sleeping at night thinking about this. And some people who have psychological conditions, maybe can just go off the deep end and do something like this. I don't find that at all unbelievable. I think that that's probably what happened.
Right. The frustrating thing is when I watch a lot of the news coverage over this incident, they talk about it as if these people were gunned down simply for being Jewish, instead of focusing on the fact that they are Israeli diplomats, that they are representing a government that is engaged in what is genocide. It's becoming clearer and clearer to people as genocide. Instead, it's like, no, they were gunned down for their Jewishness, which is just, it's just such a frustrating distortion of the reality. Right. It's like, no, talk about the fact that they were Israeli, not that they were Jews.
Yeah.
It's
now,
like, that's
we don't know. He may have not known that they were Israelis. It was the Jewish Museum. We just don't know at this point. But even if they were gunned down because they were Jewish, it was because Jewishness and genocide have become inextricably linked in the minds of many people. Now, that may be unfair, but it just is obviously happening. And the problem is not just anti-Semitism or, bad anti-Semites out there. The problem is the genocide. And if you are genuinely concerned about the rise of anti-Semitism and the genocide, be a brave person like, Max Blumenthal or Glenn Greenwald or, Norman Finkelstein, Jews that are just unequivocally opposed to this genocide and have been spoken very, very bravely against it. They're the most powerful. They're fighting anti-Semitism, but people who are trying to make excuses for Israel, who are, clearly, providing cover for Israel, like so many people in the media, no, they're creating a possibility anyway of a real rising anti-Semitism, because human beings, what they, who they are, they don't, they make these associations or they put too much weight on these associations, but the association is real. It's a Jewish state committing genocide. So no, that's wrong. There are very brave Jews that are opposing it. You shouldn't, and murder is murder. It doesn't matter. But this is going to happen. And if you're afraid you don't want more incidents to occur, you should be fighting this genocide. If anti-Semitism is something that really, really frightens you, you should be fighting this genocide.
Amen.